Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's Friday, and if you're still in quarantine, I hope you're doing okay. If not, hope you're staying safe. This is the Power Lunch. It's good to be with you. The point of the show is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, corporate leaders, or just plain cool people who are doing amazing work. That is the whole point of the show, and we want to learn from them. That's why we have them on. We want to pick their brains, see what they're doing that's maybe can help us be better at what we do. Now, the fun part of the show is that it is broadcasting live, not only on LinkedIn. This is a LinkedIn live show, but we also broadcast on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all those platforms. And we'll monitor those platforms actually throughout the program because we want you to engage with us. We want you to ask your questions. Again, that's why we do it, so that you can get to the answers you need to be better at what you do. So please do ask your questions. We'll try to get to them. Sometimes I'm a little stingy with our guests, and I have so many questions I have to ask them that we don't get to them. But we try. We try when we have good questions. Now, if you like the program, give it a like or share, and so that your network can benefit. We want your friends and families and everybody you know to benefit as well. Now, today, we're going to have some fun. I'm curious because I'm a speaker and an author and a writer, and I do a lot of events. I was doing a lot of events before COVID hit, and Blue Melnick runs a company called Sage Event Management with his wife, Bari Baumgardner, and Sage specializes in helping speakers and authors and influencers leverage live and now virtual events to build their business, their coaching businesses, and their speaking businesses. In the last 30 days, and what's fascinating about Sage is in the last 30 days, they've sort of transformed their business from sort of a live event company to a virtual event company. And I think there are two things that are interesting about that for me. One is the business case of a company that made a huge pivot and how they did that and the thinking behind it and how they did it. And then the second part is I'm a speaker and so I might learn something today of how I can sort of transition my business to a better virtual business. So that's interesting. We're going to learn how to do that today. We're going to talk about it. Blue, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Rhett. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun lunch hour.
I hope so. I hope we have some fun. That's what we intend. We don't go into this hoping that it's a boring hour.
Well, and you were mentioning the types of people that you have on. I feel like there were some pretty solid qualifications there. Hopefully, I at least land under the cool people category at the very least.
I think you fit in, across the board there, man. You're good. You're good. We wear matching shirts today almost, so we're good. I wanted to ask, you made this big pivot, or maybe it's not such a big pivot in some ways, but I mean, man, we are in some weird times, and I got to wonder what that first couple of weeks was like when this started happening, and when you sort of realized we've got to do something drastic. We've got to do something to really transition the business.
Yeah. So it's funny. Before I'd say March 13th, we weren't sure that this was really going to affect us. There was a lot of unknown, a lot of question marks. That week we were in Puerto Rico for a consulting day with a client of ours, and then we went from Puerto Rico to Miami for what wound up to be the last live event that we've done so far this year. And that Friday, which was March 13th, I believe, Trump declared a national emergency. And we went from on Thursday when we were in an airport, it feeling pretty normal, to on Monday when we were flying home, it felt like I was walking through the Atlanta airport, in a scene from The Walking Dead, just minus the zombies. And, between that day, the 13th, or really the Monday when we got back, and that Friday, we had every single live event that we had from, March, mid March, all the way through September 1st, either cancel outright, move, or reschedule entirely for next year. And for a relatively small business in the grand scheme of things, to lose what was essentially 6 months of business is a massive,
catastrophic.
yeah, it's a massive issue. General business practices, people say, try and have 3 months of runway. Even if we did, that wouldn't have been enough.
And you guys are in business together, so it's not like there was one income coming in from something else. And
no, it's not like it's like, hey, don't worry, honey, I still have a job. It's like, no, it's the same thing. So, we had a heart to heart and kind of said, what are we going to do? Do we do what pretty much every other event company is doing? Either event company, AV company, anybody in hospitality, hotels, they're all doing this, or they all did this, which was essentially lay off their entire team. Or do we try and make a pivot and move forward with our team? Because, and we decided to do the latter, and I'm glad we did. But one of the reasons that we did, we thought about it. We was like, listen, at some point, live events are going to come back, right? And our workers, our team, are fairly skilled. And if we lay them off, and we lay them off for 3 to 6 months, at the end of that 3 to 6 months, they're not likely to just be hanging out, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for us to hire them back. They probably will have gotten jobs somewhere. And now you have a bigger problem, because now you have business and nobody to fulfill on it. So we took some knowledge that I came to this industry from the video production world. Bari, my wife, started the company in 2004, and we just kind of put our heads together and said, let's try and figure out if we can create a virtual event experience that people aren't really doing right now, and look at it a little bit differently. Don't look at it through the eyes of technology. Look at it through the eyes of the experience for the attendee and the host, and create something pretty awesome. So we went to our first client that had gotten canceled, which was April 3rd through the 5th. So a couple weeks later, we had just over 2 weeks to figure this out. And I said, hey, Dylan, your event's not happening because Indianapolis, where the event was taking place, had shut down. You want to try something crazy? And pitched him on an idea, and proposed a partnership, because there was a massive unknown here, right? So we took reduced fees. I worked with an AV provider that is the company that we've been using for live events for the past 13, 14 years. And much like us, they don't have any business right now. So we collaborated and created a pretty amazing experience to put on a virtual event that actually had more success than the live event that took place for the same client a year ago. And
wow.
Yeah, it was wild. And when I say more success, I mean more people in attendance, happier attendees, better networking, more revenue from the event. The sponsors were happier from this event because we had 7 sponsors. They felt like they had not only the best sponsorship experience in a virtual event, most of them said this was the best sponsorship experience they've had, period. Which was wild. That was one that I did not expect. I mean, truthfully, I wasn't sure what to expect as we went into this. But we did that one. And once we had that result, it was a fun story to tell.
What kind of event was it? I mean,
yeah, it's an educational event for the most part. The majority of our clients are in the information space. So knowledge brokers, teachers, educators, and they tend to be helping people who are small business entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, coaches, consultants, influencers, people like that. So they're teaching a skill set. So if you've heard of names like Jeff Walker, Russell Brunson and ClickFunnels, Dean Graziosi, Stu McLaren, Lisa Sasevich, these are all clients of ours. These are the people that we work with.
Okay.
And they, so they all are in a similar space. And this particular client supported people in helping them to build an Amazon wholesale business, which interestingly happened to be a good time for that because,
perfect time for that. Right.
Exactly. So He had some interesting things that happened. But that's the type, to answer your question, that's the event that this was specifically.
Okay. No, I just wanted to put it in context. I mean, is it, as to what kind of event what it was. But you were explaining some of the surprises out of that. So I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's totally fine. So, the first surprise that we had, and this probably shouldn't have been a surprise, but the event, when it was scheduled to be in person, we had about 300 people register. And, to give a little more context, this ticket came as a free with purchase. So it was people who had access or had purchased a $2,000 educational product. I actually think it was $2,500. So they had some skin in the game, but it was a free ticket, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And when they went virtual, they went back out to the folks who had purchased this product previously and said, hey, we're going virtual. Now that we're virtual, do you want to come? And they went from 300 in attendance to 1,200.
Wow.
Which that was the first surprise. But when you think about it, no planes, no hotels, no meals, no Ubers, no car rentals, no dog sitters, no babysitters, no mother-in-law that has to watch the kids, none of that stuff because they can do it from home. So very frictionless. There's no expense because even a free event, you factor all those things in, it costs a couple $1,000s to go to a free event, right?
Yeah.
So much less friction in terms of getting people to come or register for the event. The next surprise that we had, and stop me along the way if you have any questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
But the next surprise that we had was people actually showed up. So of the 1,200 people that registered for the event in advance, we had 1,023 of them actually show up for a check-in process that we walked them through.
Mm-hmm.
And of those people, of those 1,023 people who actually showed up, we had between 700 and 900 people in attendance for 3 days straight from 10:30 in the morning till about 7 o'clock at night Eastern time. So there were long days, and we really, going into this, we were like, are people going to stick with us, right? Are people going to stay with us throughout these relative days?
That's an amazing retention rate. I mean,
especially when you think about like webinars or something. I did a webinar last night with my wife. We had like 1,400 people register for the webinar. And as you can imagine, your typical numbers, we had 250 people show up. And that's, that's good.
50% retention on a webinar. If you're lucky.
Exactly. You get a little higher right now because everybody's stuck at home. So we expected a little higher, but to get 70 to 90% of your attendees actually show up and stick with you was pretty mind blowing. But we did a few things in advance to kind of think through that because we tried to tackle the problem before the event took place because we knew it was going to be a problem, right? We knew people were going to think of this like, is this just a webinar that's been extended for 4 days? So we did a few things to try and differentiate it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you actually put on the full conference and not just spread it out over, I'm attending a couple of those right now that are spread out over a month, right? And it's I like this. I like the way that they did this. I mean, it seemed like they just held the whole conference. They just did it virtually.
Yeah. So they said, when they went out to their attendees, they said, you've already held the dates on your calendar. You were planning on not being at home. Just hold the dates on your calendar. We're giving you 2 days of your life back because you don't have to travel, but keep the dates on your calendar. We're going to do it as a virtual event. Stick with us. It's going to be a good time. And I'll tell you, do you mind if I share with you? Because I think this is pretty cool. And I think your listeners, if they're thinking about doing virtual, there were 4 things that we did that I think are key to having the show up rate that we did.
Okay, sure.
So the first thing that we did is much unlike webinars and, even this broadcast, no recordings. So you had to show up live. And we told people that in advance because we wanted them to be with us for this experience. We wanted them to go through it.
I'm writing this down. This is good stuff.
No, please do. Listen, it's what we did for our next to virtual events, which also had very similar retention rates. We were getting between 70 and 90% retention for the full 3 days. It's what we're doing for our future events that we have planned, one next weekend, and then our future client events over the course of the month of June. So number one, no recordings. You wouldn't walk into a ballroom at an hour and a half late and say, hey, can I get the recordings for the keynote speaker I missed, right? So we're treating this like a live event. If you don't show up, you miss it. The second thing that we did that differentiated ourselves from webinars pretty significantly is everybody got sent a swag box. And similar to when you go to check in for a live event, you get a bag with some stuff in it, right?
Yeah.
So we sent out via FedEx a branded journal, branded pen, some workbook materials, like some exercise materials, and a few fun things. Like we had a little door hanger that said, "Shh, I'm busy learning in here," that was branded to the client. We had a couple stickers in there, just some things to make it a little more fun. But the entire goal of doing this was to give it a tactile experience, like make it real, something that you can feel and hold, rather than just something that's ones and zeros or bits and bytes, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing, listen, email is fantastic. I love email, but email open rates are atrocious, right? I mean, if you're lucky, you get 25%. Right now, email open rates are a little higher industry-wide because everybody's, again, stuck at home. But generally, 20% is like, you're amazing if you're getting that as an email open rate. And this is literally the best email reminder for your live event, which is a FedEx guy walking up to the door, knocking on the door, and handing you a package that is, here's your live event materials. And we've timed it so that it arrived 1 to 2 days before the event. So those are the two things. The third thing that we did was we put everybody through a check-in process. And we did this for one reason, but we're going to keep doing it for another. And that check-in process was pretty simple. We sent them an email and said, hey, click on this link to register for the live event or to check in to the live event. And we gave them 2 days to do it. And then we sent them multiple reminders. Incidentally, there was also a letter inside the box that told them what to do to check in as well. Yeah, exactly. So they went to a website, and one of the last step was click here for a tech check. And when you clicked on it, it popped open a Zoom meeting where a member of our team was sitting and waiting and welcomed the person to the live event and had a face-to-face interaction, much like you and I are having right now. And said, can you see me? Can you hear me? Turn on your camera, unmute yourself. This is how you raise your hand. Just some basics of Zoom, right? Because we were using Zoom as our meeting platform.
Right.
And we did it because we wanted to make sure that when we started the event, we didn't have any technology issues, right? We didn't spend the first 30 minutes with people going, I can't see you, I can't hear you, how do I log into Zoom, right? The typical stuff that happens on a webinar.
Right.
But because of the fact that they had all been in a Zoom meeting with a member of our team within the previous 48 hours, we were able to start on time with no tech issues. The reason we're going to keep doing it, though, is it created another differentiation point in that when was the last time you went to a webinar when a member of the event team welcomed you, greeted you, had a conversation with you virtually and said, this is how you attend the webinar without having any technology problems? It doesn't happen, right? So we did three things before the event even started that completely differentiated this from a webinar and had people treating it like a live event.
Yeah, I mean, you had those touches that you normally have at a live event prior to even walking in the door, right?
Exactly. And I think this is what happens when you get a live event company that tries to solve a problem using, human interaction rather than technology interaction. And we really did. That's how we approached everything. We're like, okay, let's look. What would we do in a live event? Can we virtualize that? Can we do that virtually? And if the answer is yes, we tried to. And these are the things that we continue to do that continue to work. The fourth thing that we do is we gamify the whole process. So we actually use a word called funification or funify, just because gamification to me sounds like a marketing term from a couple of years ago that got really popular. And and I'm not a huge fan of just those like flash in the pan, like Facebook Messenger bots as an example, right? I haven't heard anything about them. I know they still exist, but it's like for a year and a half, it's like all you couldn't look at Facebook without seeing an ad for somebody to say, learn how to build your own Facebook Messenger bot. And anyway, so essentially what it translates to is we rewarded our attendees for actions we wanted them to take anyway, right? So we want them to show up. We want them to click on the button to join the meeting. We want them to go interact with our vendor sponsors. We want them to submit exercises that they do. So every time they did those things, we rewarded them with points. And we did it with technology. So we did it with a plugin for WordPress. But this can really be like, for those of you, for your viewers watching, it doesn't have to be high tech. It can be as simple as saying to your attendees, hey, listen, like go set up a free Facebook group and, or LinkedIn group, and say to your attendees, I want you to post a picture of your work environment today because we want to see where you are, and post it on Facebook or LinkedIn. And then when they do that, just take a pen, write down all their names, the people who did it, throw their names in a fishbowl and pick out a winner. And now you've gamified the process without having a requirement for high tech, but you have to use it, right? It's fun to see that it's gamified, but you then actually have to take action on the gamification in order for them to continue to interact with it, in order for them to continue to use it, and for it to inspire them to keep coming back. So those are the 4 things that I feel like we did pretty well and differently than most, or well, almost all that I've seen anyway. That is making our live events that we're producing virtually a lot more interactive and a lot more successful than even their in-person counterparts from, the same client from previous years or previous months.
No, that's the way you've integrated some of those things is just it's fascinating. What do you think in terms of when things come back and we come back to some sort of normal or whatever that's going to look like?
Yeah.
What's the are we talking about some sort of hybrid between live and virtual? Because I mean, with the success, if I'm your client there, and I'm looking at the return on investment, or as you like to say, in return on engagement, right? If I'm looking at that and I'm saying, okay, well, I had 300 people scheduled, but I knocked it out of the park when we did it virtually, and then we had 1,200 people. I mean, that makes you really think about it. I mean, how's it going to come back?
So
how is it going to come back?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We've been having conversations with clients who have their events in the fall and in some cases in the spring, because live events we plan well in advance, right? We don't take a 2.5-week runway to plan a live event like we did for our first virtual. It's anywhere from 6 to 12 months of planning and, logistics and strategy and so on and so forth. So we're talking about this already with our clients. And the reality is, I don't know the answer yet. And I think anybody who claims to is lying to you. But having experienced what it takes to really do a virtual event done right, and also having experienced what it takes to do a live event done right, the amount of attention and focus on those 2 different types of attendees, your virtual attendees and your in-person attendees, it takes a tremendous amount of focus to really engage an audience in both cases. And I think people who try and do both simultaneously, both audiences are going to suffer. Or you're going to completely ignore one audience and just, pander to your in-person audience. And then what you wind up with is basically just a live stream of a live event. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. We've been doing that for years. But what I do think will wind up happening, like to your point, our clients who have realized that they have a bigger global reach and a bigger global impact by doing these virtually, when live events do come back, I suspect some of them, the ones that love the live event environment, will continue to do live events, but they'll probably also add on a virtual event experience for those that couldn't come live. And I think you'll still have people coming to live. And I think simultaneously, you'll still continue to see bigger audiences and bigger draws virtually. That's a guess. I really have no idea. And I think only time will tell. And it'll be interesting to see what the future holds for that.
I almost, and just thinking about it right off the top of what you were just saying, the way you did that last virtual event where you had the 1,200 show up, the first one that you did, uh, there's almost an exclusivity to that, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
where that could be an add-on thing for, if I go to a live event, I'm not going to sit there with the speaker. If I'm an attendee, I'm not really going to have access to the speaker, right? I'm not really going to have access to the top of the speaker list.
Right.
So if you could do a virtual event where I maybe get to ask somebody like that a question, right? Would you sign up and pay extra to be in sort of an exclusive virtual event where you do get to maybe interact with some of the bigger names on the ticket? I could see a business model there where you almost make the virtual an exclusive thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a few different ways to approach it for sure. And I think, this is an old saying. I was actually trying to figure out who said it first, which is necessity is the mother of invention. And, if I believe Wikipedia, it was said first by somebody in a book in the 1600s. But, one of the things that COVID has provided us with is the necessity to, if we do want to continue to gather as people, that you have to do it virtually. And, and when it comes down to it for live events, Rhett, people really come to live events for three things, and you kind of touched on it. One is content. That's easy, right? Anybody can do content if they know their stuff. Just turn on a camera, do live stream, and you're done. Right. But the other two reasons people tend to come to live events is connection and community, right? Connection, yes, to the speaker, but also to each other, and community, because for a lot of us, especially in the space that we live in, and the entrepreneurial market space where people tend to work from home, they tend to own their own small businesses. I don't know about you, but most of my friends think I'm crazy, right? They have no idea what I do for a living. And if I tried to explain it, they'd be like, so wait a second, you don't just go to work at 9 o'clock and come back at 5? Like, what do you mean? So these live events allow us the opportunity to connect with our community, connect with like-minded people who understand, the craziness that is entrepreneurialism. Right. And you really do make friends for life. Some of my best friends actually right now come from events, people that I've met that I probably wouldn't have had an opportunity to meet otherwise. Like, when was the last time you went to a webinar, as an example? And yeah, you get the chat and you start chatting, but when was the last time you actually connected with somebody in the chat and that turned into like a lifelong friendship? It doesn't happen. Yeah,
Zero.
Exactly. Zero.
No, that's a really great point. And that's what we crave. I mean, I think we crave that, it's sort of human nature to crave that connection and want. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. That's going to be, I think, the driving factor. And live events are not going to go away. We have to, that's just a fact.
Yeah.
They're going to.
I hope not. I'm a live event person, right? I can't wait to do my next live event. Being in a room with 3,000 to 4,000 of my closest friends. Are you kidding me? I can't wait to do it again.
Well, no, but there is something to that, right? There is an energy that you get from it. It helps. I go to some conferences that are really just kind of good for my soul, right? They're good for, they're almost a necessity to sort of get rejuvenated and remotivated and get re-energized. You talk a little bit about what people have been getting wrong with virtual events. Talk about that a little bit.
I think the biggest thing.
You use the NFL as an example of that, of the draft.
Well, it's fascinating. The NFL's draft was, that was a fun experience. They did a few things really, really well, and I think they did one thing exceptionally poorly. And it was such a missed opportunity. The things that they did well is the stuff that sports broadcasts always do well, which is pre-recorded packages, right? You've got these great stories that have been edited probably over weeks with, your prospects and the top draft picks and so on and so forth, that talking with their families and all of that stuff. And those were, as always, fantastic. They did a pretty decent job with the commentators of having, a bunch of different windows where you could see all of them. They were all from home. The two areas that I thought really were painful to watch was, number one, Roger Goodell in his basement or whatever room that was in, with a small 32-inch television behind him that had 16 fans from each city when they were doing the draft. And you're like, you guys have literally billions of dollars at your disposal. You can't give Roger a slightly bigger television and allow him the ability to interact a little bit? Like, nothing? You got nothing here? Come on. And then the second thing that I thought was pretty painful to watch, to be honest with you, is all of the static camera views inside of the people who were drafted. Usually those angles are a view from the table that they're at, sitting with their agent and their family and so on and so forth. But all of those weird static views of the living room of the players sitting around with family and friends, they were all really awkward shots. And I mean, who's going to get drafted. Like, it's not a surprise. You know who your top, whatever, 50 are, 100 are. You guys have the money. Let's put a small, one person. They only needed one person camera crews in these things. And it would have been that much better. The ability to give them a mic and say something, give us a little bit. It was just, I found it hard to watch. I mean, not that I love football, but whatever. I was watching it because I was curious what they were going to do. And I thought what they did was very underwhelming. So that's the NFL. But to actually answer your question about what most people who don't have billions of dollars at their disposal are doing wrong, is most of them are taking a property that they know, like an online property that they know, or event that they know, which is webinars. And they're basically extending them over the course of 3 days, 2-3 days, 1 day. And, sitting there and watching one person talk to a camera like I am right now is painful for the viewer, and it's painful for the audience. And I think what people need to start doing is take a look at virtual events like they're live events, because they are, and approach them like live events, not approach them like extended webinars. And it's a small distinction, but if you start taking a look at the things that you do in live events and seeing if there's a way that you can take that and virtualize it, most of the time the answer is yes. And in a lot of cases, it actually winds up being better virtual than it does in person. And I mean, seriously, had you asked me this question 2 months ago and said, hey, do you think you'll be able to, could we create a similar experience online to what you guys create in a meeting room with live events? I probably would have laughed at you. I probably would have said absolutely not. I may have sworn a little bit as I was doing it. And I would have thought you were crazy to even ask the question. But,
right.
Sitting here 60 days later, having experienced 3 big virtual events, all of which that had greater success in almost every measurable way than their in-person counterparts, I can tell you the biggest reason that I think it's happening is because we're approaching these events like they're live events. We're approaching them the same way we would, with the same type of strategy, same type of thought, and same attention to detail that we do with our in-person live events.
Yeah, and that's probably what differentiates it, right? Because it just has that little extra flair, or that little extra thing that makes it stand out a little bit. And I think you're absolutely right. This is dreadful, sitting here looking at a camera, listening, trying to stay tuned in for any period of time, I think is absolutely right.
It's easier when you're talking with someone, right? I mean, you and I could probably sit here and chat all day long, but in a webinar format, it's really just one way, and that becomes hard for both the viewer and the person doing the chatting.
But even this format, right? I mean, it's hard to stay tuned in to something for any length of time if it's, when you're just looking at, if you're looking at this on the screen, you are probably, I'm guessing, looking and doing something else at the same time. So yeah,
I've got 3 screens in front of me, right? So I'm kind of with you on that one.
that's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
You talk about so what is that 20%? I mean, you talked about 80%. Of what you're doing is probably working for a live event. What's that extra? I mean, you've talked about it a little bit, and I guess that goes back to those little things you were doing. Is that what you would change? What else?
Pretty much, yeah. So what you're talking about is something that we say often right now in the virtual space when we're chatting and we're talking to people who are thinking about doing it, especially people who have done live events before. About 80% of it is the same. The way you have to interact with your attendees is the same. The timelines that you have to give them is the same. The touch point, the attention to detail, all those things are very much the same. What it comes down to, if you're going to make the pivot and go virtual, it comes down to technology and to touch, right? Because the way you make those touch points is different. And obviously the technology that you use to make the event take place is different because we're not standing in the same room. We do have to have some kind of technological layer in order to make the connection and the community possible. So for us, what we are doing for our events is we're using Zoom as a platform. And it may sound kind of not sexy, but from a simplicity perspective, it's actually pretty magical. And to be clear, we're using Zoom Meeting, not Zoom Webinar. And we're doing some stuff that not everybody, and listen, we're doing this because we have attendees or events that are like 12, 13, 1400 up to, as many as 3,000 to 4,000 people in attendance. And Zoom Meeting out of the box doesn't really support that. And beyond that, one of the reasons that we love Zoom is both the gallery view, which allows people to see each other, which, in your typical webinar format, they can't do. And then also the breakout feature that Zoom Meeting has that allows you to take groups of 300 or less and break them down into small groups of 6, like 50 groups, basically. So whatever your attendance is, you can break them down into small groups divided by 50. So we tend to keep our Zoom meetings at 200 people per meeting. So we can break them down into small groups of 4. And what that translates to is if you've ever been in a session room, in a meeting room, and the speaker's on stage and he says, take the next 5 minutes and write down some ideas. And at the end of that, he says, okay, now turn to the person next to you and talk about your top idea that you just came up with, right? This essentially is active learning. And, it allows you to listen, it allows you to write, and it allows you to talk. So you're embedding what you just learned into yourself so that it's a better takeaway. It also allows you to connect with the people around you, which is kind of fun, and it's what live events can do. Well, right. With breakouts inside of Zoom, we're able to do that. And we have a layer of technology, layer of hardware underneath Zoom so that we take multiple meetings and we're connecting them to each other using hardware. And, this comes into play because as an event company, we have a production company that we partner with for our live events. That production company has a lot of gear sitting on the shelf collecting dust. So we have a lot at our disposal, right? We were able to, I called my buddy Chris, who's the owner of the production company, Crescent Event Productions. And I said, hey, Chris, this is before the first event. I said, I've got a crazy idea. What do you think of this? And we kind of laid out what I had in my head. And I said, is it doable? And I kind of knew the answer that yes, it was doable. The bigger question was it doable in at that point, 10 days? Right. So we essentially tied together up to 16 different meetings. So 16 meetings, if you're keeping track at 200 people per meeting, is 3,200 people. So we've now extended Zoom's meeting capabilities to go up to 3,200 while still being able to make about 160. No, it's more than that. I'm trying to think of the 50 times 16.
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm trying to do the math in my head, but it's like 800 or 900 breakout rooms that we're able to actually break them down into small groups of, so that even big audiences can still have these micro moments where they're interacting with their fellow attendee and chatting. So how did I get down that road? What was the question that led me down that spiral?
No, I mean it's how, I mean, I think that it's important because one of the things being able to do in these rooms is break them out in the group. I think that's where you're going with it. It's just that it's the capability to let people interact and get that experience of sitting there and building that and for a speaker too, right? I mean, that's if my part of my program is always to break people into groups and to be able to have them interact and come up with a solution to a question or whatever, then being able to have that capability still is important.
It's critical, right? And like you said, as a speaker, you probably do that in your presentation at some point, whether it's a short interaction or a slightly longer one. And especially if you do multi-day events, it's something that is a key part of the connection and community component that we talked about, and the
Right.
ability to allow people to get to know one another. So that's where it comes down to that 20% of tech and touch. You really have to think about how you're going to allow them to connect with each other.
One of the things I like about that too, about using the meetings, is what drives me crazy about the webinars. And I was thinking about this the other day because I was doing a webinar. As a speaker, I really love to feed off the energy of the room, right? It's part of what's really appealing about speaking is that the energy in the room is really important to even how your own perform how you perform, how you do.
Yeah.
And your energy. And I think being able to do it in the meetings where you can actually still see people would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And part of what we did, we talked a little bit about the studio that we built out. And a part of what we did with that studio is have the ability to, not only do we have all of those meetings tied together, but the stage that people stand on has a bank of televisions in front of them that really actually allows them to see so much of the audience. Now, I'm going to try something here. I think I'm going to actually do this right, but I'm not in front of my control computer, so bear with me. But I think what you see right now is a photo of me standing on the stage. And talk about being able to see people. There's 8 large screen TVs, each of which have 49 people on them. And that amounts to 392 different faces that you can see at any one moment. So the ability to interact and, like you said, feed off the audience is critical. We think anyway, to a really amazing experience for the host, right? Because so far everything we've talked about has been about the attendee, and the attendee is super important, obviously, but you also have to keep the host's energy up, the speaker's energy up, and that was one of the ways that we did that, so that, just like you said, you could feed off the energy of the audience.
So you have an event coming up that we wanted to talk about. That's going to help. You're going to train people and help people learn how to do this better. Can you talk about that?
For sure. Yeah. So our crack marketing team got together and we named this event the virtual event on virtual events. Really hard to figure out what we're talking about, but we're talking about virtual events. And we're going to be teaching, essentially what we do with our clients and what has made these events a success. So we're a strategy first company, which translates to, our name, SAGE, actually stands for Strategic Advice for Growing Events. And we come at every solution or every live event with a strategy first eye to things, right? We look at it through the lens of what's the end result that the host is trying to accomplish. And that's just the strategy component. So our first day is all about strategy. We're going to be covering the tech stack as well as talking about what the end result of your live event should be. We're also going to be talking about active learning pretty heavily and how to integrate that into even a virtual environment. Day 2, we're going to be talking about virtualize, meaning what are the different pieces and parts of the live event experience that you envision and how can you actually virtualize them. So we're going to be talking about guest speakers. We're going to be talking about sponsors and exhibitors, the registration process, all of the things that are great to do in a live event environment and how to actually virtualize them. We're also going to be covering marketing that day, because a big part of hosting any live event really is getting people to show up. So we'll be talking about that. And then day 3 is about actualizing. So putting all of your ideas into action. And finally, on that 3rd day, we're going to be covering content flow. And it sounds kind of backwards, like everything we do here at Sage, but we're leading with content last, or we're finishing with content, because we really believe that knowing where you want to take your audience first is the smartest way to actually build out your content. And it sounds obvious when I say it like that, but most people who host a live event think of what they're going to teach first, and then they say, okay, now I got to market it, right? And if you reverse engineer that, you flip that on its head, all of a sudden the marketing of your live event is super easy, or becomes a lot easier, because you know what it is that you're, who you're selling to, and what you're selling. So that's kind of the 3 days. It's a full 3-day experience, March 29th through the 31st. So if you're watching this and it's recorded and it's after March 29th, I'm sorry. But if you're watching this live or before next Tuesday, there's still a chance to register and get all of the benefits and really experience, I mean, not to toot our own horn too much, but to experience what I think a real solid virtual event can be. We have about 1,000 people registered right now. So looking forward to seeing what we can do with them. We've got a cool swag box that's going to be going out. Like we do, take our own medicine, essentially. So all those 4 things that we mentioned: no recordings, swag box, check-in, gamification, all of those things you're going to actually get to experience, as well as what I hope is some pretty cool content over the course of the 3 days.
Well, I think it should be interesting, and we should put a link in the bottom of the LinkedIn post and on the other platforms so people can get to it very easily.
Cool. Yeah, and
if you'll send me the link for that.
I will. Yeah, it's super easy, actually. It's just thevirtualevent.live. Right. We really, I'm going as easy as we can. I'm a simple person. So thevirtualevent.live. Today, up until today, end of the day today, the price point is $97. It technically is going up tonight at midnight. But do you mind if I give you a promo code for your viewers? So if they do see this after today, they can still register for that discounted rate rather than paying the full price?
Sure. No, that would be great. If you send that to me, we'll post it.
Yeah, it's just Power. Let's just use your last name. Power is the promo code, and that will make sure that you get the $97 registration fee.
Sounds good to me. Make it simple.
Nice and easy.
Hey, Blue, it's been great to have you, man.
Well, thank you for having me. I had fun. This was a fun lunch. Your audience has been awesome to interact with, and because I assume some of those questions came from them. And thank you very much for having us.
You're welcome, and good luck with the event. Thank you for staying with us for the hour, and have a great weekend. Stay safe, and go out and do great work. We'll see you next week.